Okay. The link is in the chat, so you don't need to worry about scanning the thing right now. So you can just use that, and we will go ahead and get started. So first off, thank you everyone, and for coming to the interview review. My name is Hunter. I'm the president of Scro. In case this is your first time attending a meeting, so we'll go ahead and get started. So most likely, if you are here, you've already joined our GroupMe. If not, you can go ahead and scan our QR code for our GroupMe. It will also be on our website, scrogator.com, in case if you have not already joined that there. The other announcement is that we do have our Scro case tomorrow night at 5 p.m. We had made an announcement previously that we were going to have 4 companies: Micron, Texas Instruments, Renesas, and AMD. However, literally as of an hour ago, L3Harris reached back out to us and said that they wanted to attend as well. So we will have L3Harris there as well. The only thing about that is that we were only planning on having 4 companies, and we had 4 moderators set up, and we need to have 1 more to cover L3Harris. The benefits of this is that you will get to meet with all of the companies before the event, since you will not have the opportunity to network and talk to companies during the event itself. So if you're interested, please reach out to us at scrogator@gmail.com, or if you are in person, which there aren't really many of you in person, come up to me after the meeting and let us know. Aside from that, there's one more announcement, which is that we currently have a survey posted on our website. It basically just gives you an opportunity to give us feedback on what you think about Scro and how we've been doing recently. So if you are looking to continue to be a part of Scro for the foreseeable future, we would really appreciate it if you could fill out a survey. It covers things like what kind of events we hold, which events we should hold more often, some different things on the lecture series and different educational events we have. So if you're looking to continue to be a part of Scro, we would really appreciate it if you could give us some feedback on that. So moving on to the actual content of this presentation, we are talking about elevator pitches. We'll eventually get into interviews later on, but an elevator pitch is just a quick overview of you, your experience, and what you're looking for from the recruiter or company. It should only last about 30 to 60 seconds, but it should include things like your major, any internships or projects that are relevant. Anything like that could be helpful to mention in your elevator pitch. The objective of it is to let them know who you are, why you're there, and what you can do. And it's an opportunity to get your foot in the door and make a good impression. Even if you're not looking for a job at the time from that company, making a good impression with your elevator pitch could help to grow your network and make connections in case if you ever wanted to work for that company in the future. So regardless, you want to make sure that you have a good elevator pitch. So this is the general structure of an elevator pitch. This is just the bare bones. I'll show an example in a couple slides that has that's more fleshed out. Everything that's bolded is what you should be looking to have. You want to make sure that you mention your name, your year in school. Be sure to mention your intentions. Are you looking for a job or internship, and what type of position title would you like to fill? You can end it off with what experience you have and what you did that makes you a good candidate for this position. So you can kind of see here, I pointed out some things. Recruiters at events like Showcase, when you apply to, like it when you apply to positions before you talk to them at their company. Make sure you mention which positions you have applied to, and make sure to have the exact title of the position and the job code ready if they ask for it, because sometimes they'll ask for it if they're interested in you, and they'll make sure to put in a good word for you and maybe move you on to an interview if you have that exact job code. The other thing is that for where you actually explain your experiences, you want to make sure that you can go into as much detail as you can within those 30 to 60 seconds. Your job is to show that you are the best candidate for this position. This is really the opportunity that you have to do it, aside from what they can see on your resume. So this is that example that I had mentioned. So I pulled this from Iowa State University's Engineering Career Services. So it says, "Hi, my name is Jamie Smith. I'm a student majoring in mechanical engineering. I'm seeking to start a co-op in January. I have an interest in design." Um, sorry.
You guys ready Zoom?
Yes.
Okay, I was gonna see if this doorbell would be, if you could hear it in here, because after 5 o'clock, so really anybody ringing.
Oh, okay.
But is anyone else gonna join
Do
me?
you want me to monitor upstairs?
Well, but then you gotta sit out here. So I was gonna bring the bell in to you guys.
Yeah, you can leave the bell in here. Nobody has made it clear that they're gonna.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll work or not, so I'm gonna go ring it and you'll know if it works or not.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption. We're just going through some technical things in case if somebody shows up to the building mid meeting. I have an interest in design and testing, which aligns well with your design engineer position. I've completed several mechanical engineering projects throughout my courses, and last summer I did an internship with XYZ company. I designed prototypes, conducted testing, and prepared summary reports. I think ABC produces a lot of great products, and I'm very interested in agricultural equipment.
Is it ringing?
No, it is not. He has not done it yet.
Yeah.
I think ABC produces a lot of great products, and I'm very interested in agricultural equipment. I would love it if you would review my resume and consider me for an interview. So this does a lot of things right. Number one, it introduces themselves. Number two, it mentions their major, in this case, a mechie. Number three, it shows their intent. They're looking for a co-op specifically in January. They go on to identify what position in particular they're interested in and why they're interested in it. And then they mention their relevant experience with another company, explain what types of projects they've been working on. Obviously, their description is a little bit vague of their experience, but it's just a broad example, so it doesn't really matter. And they even went on to make a connection with the company, explain why the company as a whole appeals to them. So this is broadly what you want to include in your elevator pitch. And it basically just, gives them an idea of who you are, why you want to be there, and why you are the best person to pick for it. So this slide I just put in here, if there were more people in person, this is where there would most likely be an opportunity for you to write down your elevator pitch and practice giving elevator pitches to each other. It's a little bit difficult to do that on Zoom. So if you have not already, I would probably advise just taking an opportunity after this meeting and trying to write down an elevator pitch and just practicing it. Make sure that you can hit it within 30 to 60 seconds without talking at the speed of light, because obviously as much as you want to make sure that you hit every single point you need to, you also don't want to talk to the point where they can't understand you. So before tomorrow, or if you're not planning on attending Scrowcase and just attending the normal showcase, make sure that you practice it to make sure that you're prepared and that you have good pacing. And so now we're going to move on to interviews. The interview is the opportunity to show more in depth about yourself than you can show on your resume or in your elevator pitch. You want to be charming and professional, and keep in mind that whenever you're in an interview, you're not only representing yourself, but also UF, the engineering department, and Scro in the case of Scrowcase. So you want to make sure that you put your best foot forward regardless of what you're doing. So the types of questions that you would be getting in an interview would be behavioral and technical. Behavioral questions are strictly non-technical. They'll probably reference projects on your resume to draw from some teamwork-based experiences, things on interpersonal relationships, and general problem solving. Essentially, they'll be asking you to recall the more social aspects of a project and ask you to think critically on hypothetical, non-technical questions. The technical questions, on the other hand, revolve more around specialized engineering knowledge. They may ask you to elaborate on the thought process of some of your experiences on your resume, or they may ask more prerequisite knowledge for the position. They could also ask about some of the relevant skills on your resume, and essentially how you got them, what you did to make them better, and essentially the extent that you have those skills. So the way that you generally want to respond to behavioral questions is through what is called the STAR method. As you can see, it stands for situation, which is where you give your context to your story. When was it? Was this for a school project or a job? T stands for task, which is what was the problem? Usually addresses the question that they asked. For example, these different topics that we have on the left. Action, what did you do in response to the challenge that was mentioned in the task? And R, what were the results? How did your action that you took resolve things? What was the final outcome? The STAR method is generally a good and reliable structure to tell your stories narratively in a way that makes sure that you get the whole picture to the story, and essentially answers the question that they're asking in full. So some example behavioral questions will cover things like teamwork, which is a really common one. This example, give me an example of a time that you faced a conflict while working on a team. How did you handle that? Client-facing skills, describe a time where you had to interact with a difficult client. Talking about your ability to adapt, tell me about a time you failed. How did you deal with the situation? Tell me about a time you were under a lot of pressure. What was going on? How did you get through it? Time management skills are very important. Describe a long-term project that you manage. How did you keep everything moving along in a timely manner? Communication skills, tell me about a successful presentation you gave and why you think it was a hit. Motivation and values, tell me about your proudest professional accomplishment. Tell me about a time you were dissatisfied with your work. What could have been done to make it better? These are just broad topics and questions that are very commonly asked in interviews as part of the behavioral portion. Sometimes if the company that you're interviewing with will have multiple interviews, they might have one dedicated more to behavioral questions and one dedicated to more of the technical side of things. Sometimes it will be a mix of the two. So it really just depends. It varies from company to company. I'll get into some anecdotes later on how my personal interviews that I've gone through. But now moving on to technical questions on the semiconductor industry. You'll have to address concepts like device processing, device components, device physics, performance, voltage, current leakage. We have some example questions over here on the right. This kind of addresses a variety. Some of this is MSE directed. Some of it is more EE or ECE directed. And so it really just depends on the position that you're applying to and what they're expecting of you. So if you couldn't answer all of those, any or all of those questions on the previous slide, the objective of the lecture series is hopefully to answer some of those questions so you'll be more prepared in the future. Recruiters also won't go into an interview expecting you to have perfect knowledge of everything that you need for the position, especially if you're an underclassman or you've never had relevant internship experience before. They may anticipate that you won't necessarily know the answer to some of these questions, and that instead they'll ask more technical questions about your experiences on your resume instead. So now I'm gonna talk about some personal anecdotes. So I had 2 interviews with TI last year for an internship. And then I'm also gonna talk about I've talked to some friends and previous Scrum members about their interviews and what their takeaways were. So I'll go into that afterwards. So in my personal experience, I had 2 separate interviews for an internship at TI. In particular, it was a packaging engineering internship that I did end up getting. So I did do something right, but it didn't start off very well. My initial interview was one interview that lasted about 30 minutes. And I get on and I'm trying to connect to the system that they use. They don't use Zoom. They use a thing called Citrix for all of their calling. And my audio and video were not getting through to the recruiter. And he was understanding, and we just ended up moving to a phone call instead. The meeting consisted mainly of behavioral questions. He did ask me about a time that I needed to change my workflow to accommodate someone else, and a time where I needed to work with someone I didn't necessarily trust. I don't remember exactly how I responded to the first question, but I do remember that for the second one, I had talked about how in class I had someone that I didn't know get added to a group project, and that person was being relatively unresponsive in group chats, and the rest of us were worried that they wouldn't finish their part of the project and we would get a bad grade on it. I made sure to use the STAR method to essentially respond with what we had done and what our response was. Essentially, we just had to kind of be helicopter parents to this one person of our team. But we ended up getting an A on it, so that was kind of the important part. The other thing is that they did ask me technical questions. However, it was not directed at my the internship and what I would need for that, for the internship. It was more about, generally speaking, he asked me about what coursework and internships had prepared me for work in the semiconductor industry. And then, I basically talked about my experience with Scro and my coursework that I had taken up to that point that was relevant to semiconductors. And then he asked me to elaborate on a project from my resume that was one of my design projects for a class that I took last year. And he essentially asked me to just go through my my workflow on that project and just ask me certain questions about what I was doing. Moving on to my second interview, it somehow started off worse than the first one. I called the phone number that they had given me about 10 minutes before my scheduled time for my interview, and it turns out that the number was deactivated. At that point, I was in a panic because I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to do my interview and I was going to lose the internship. I emailed the person who had given me the phone number and informed me that I made it to the second round of interviews. And I spammed their phone with several calls until they eventually picked up. I told him the issue, and he had realized when I read out the number that they had given me the old number for their conference system, and they had a new conference call system. So I finally get into my call, and I'm 5 minutes late. I apologize a bunch. I explained the situation. They were very understanding, but at that point, my heart was going crazy, and I was very flustered and embarrassed from the whole situation. It took me a while to calm down how I was feeling, and I stumbled through the first few questions. I definitely wasn't thinking straight, and I wasn't really too clear on my responses at some point. They had asked me about my skills that I had on my resume and how I developed them. They asked me about one of my projects on my resume where I was responsible for a material selection for a new heat sink, and I had stated that we decided to use a copper zirconium alloy, and they asked me to walk through step by step as to how we had gotten to our final material. I discussed the application that we needed something with high thermal conductivity, low specific heat, high working temperatures, etc. And then they also asked me about Scro and the role I played as president. They asked me what my responsibilities were and how I managed them, as well as school. Then they asked me about the type of person I was outside of school. They asked me about my family, if I had any siblings, what my hobbies were, if I played any sports. That was honestly probably the most off-putting question of the interview because I was not expecting to be asked about that sort of thing. I was so caught up in preparing for the professional side of things that I didn't consider that they would possibly ask who I was and anything other than professional things. So I was just caught off guard at that point, and it kind of took a little bit of hand holding to ask what they meant when they asked what type of person I am outside of school. They also went on to ask about if I had any plans for grad school and where I would ideally want to go if I were to get my master's, since I was undecided at that point. And then they asked the last real question of the interview, which was they asked what would I do if my lifelong best friend stole the answers to our final exam that was worth 70% of our grade. I walked them through my thought process. I told them that would be easy to say in a hypothetical situation, that you would do the right thing and not take the answers and turn your friend in. But in reality, I know for sure I wouldn't have taken the answers, but I couldn't confidently say that I could do that to my friend and turn them in. And they responded really well to that answer. And then as the final question of the interview, they asked how I prepared for the interview. And I had essentially told them that I had my resume on hand and I was referencing it whenever they asked questions about my resume. And then I had looked at common behavioral questions and that they asked in interviews, and I wrote out the answers so I could start thinking about different projects I've worked on in the past, getting used to formatting a response using the STAR format. Even if I didn't get asked those exact questions, I at least was familiar with how to format it to make it sound good. I'd also asked different people who are already in industry or have experience with the industry, what sort of technical questions they would ask, or what things I should look into to be prepared for the internship. And that was essentially how my second interview went. And so my personal takeaways from this is number one, not to let things get to your head when things go wrong. Specifically for the second interview, I was extremely flustered after all my struggles with getting connected to the call. I struggled to pull myself out of it because in my mind, in that moment, I was already failing. But I realized that they weren't holding it against me. They aren't sitting there waiting for me to fail. If anything, they're trying to like you in that moment, and you just have to stay calm and be yourself. And like I said before, you just want to be charismatic, be likable, and if you have the opportunity, you can try to be funny and make jokes as long as they're, respectful, professional, and relevant. You don't want to open your interview with a knock-out joke or anything like that. Just keep it simple and be yourself. Don't try too hard, and you'll end up being fine. The other thing that I took away is that you don't need to fill the air every single second and every time that there's dead space. It's okay to pause and collect your thoughts. If you've gotten off track with one of your answers, you can feel free to just stop and pause, let them know that you're stopping to think things through, so that you don't just, drop off giving your answer in the middle of your response. You can take a minute to collect yourself, and then you can continue with your answer to make sure that it's coherent. You also want to make sure that you are versatile in what you are expecting. Make sure that you're prepared to talk about things that aren't on your resume. And then the final thing is that you shouldn't feel scared to admit that you don't know something or that you're wrong. They just want to understand your thought process and know how you think through problems. The best thing that you can do is talk through your thought process on a question out loud. The final behavioral question that I had with my best friend with the test answers, I explained my thought process as I was working through it out loud. And it was something that they noted at the end of the interview, that they said that they loved hearing what I was thinking and the different scenarios I was considering, and to essentially make sure that I didn't just tell them a yes or no answer, what I would do essentially. And so moving on to other people's takeaways, some of these were from last year's presentation and given by a SCRO alumni. Others were given by people I know who had other interviews for internships recently. So starting with, don't be afraid of to reach out to the interviewer when it is past your interview time. If you come up with any questions about the company or position following the interview, if you have the contact information from your interviewer, or if you had to get in contact with somebody to set up your interview time, reach out to them and feel free to ask them any questions that you have. As long as you handle it respectfully, it can only demonstrate that you're inquisitive and that you're interested in the position. So it really can only be a good thing at that point. If you aren't sure what they're asking in a technical question or really any question, feel free to ask them for more details and elaborate on the question. It gives you an opportunity to give the best answer that you possibly can. And if you still don't know the answer, you can ask them to explain the answer and just show active interest in the response that they're giving and take note of it for future interviews. And this is a common point that I'm sure a lot of you have heard, but make sure to have information on the company and the position you're applying for. Sometimes they'll ask you what you know about the company or why you want to work for them in particular. And by doing your research, it can help you answer in a manner that doesn't sound too generic, like it could be applied to any other company. And then the last point I have, I know it's very vague on the slide, but it's just that you don't know who your interviewer knows. I told this during the resume review last week, but essentially a friend of mine had gotten an interview with a startup. This wasn't semiconductor related. This was just for a different internship. And since it was with a small startup, the person that was interviewing them was the person that would be their boss if they were hired. The interviewer noticed that my friend was in a certain research group for a little over a year and then switched to do research under a different professor. They asked about this, and my friend told the interviewer that they weren't a fan of how the professor never took the time to talk with their masters or undergrads, and all of the instruction was through emails. And they preferred rather how the current professor took the time to get to know the undergrads and help them personally. Following that interview, my friend was initially rejected, but about a month after being unable to find a better candidate, the startup returned to her, made an offer, which my friend then accepted. Once when they started, my friend found out that the person interviewing them got their PhD from UF and their mentor was the professor that my friend didn't like. So essentially you want to be careful with who you talk about. Make sure that you either are telling the truth when you're referencing a specific person, or that you talk in a good light about people that you have worked with, because you never know who the person you are talking to knows, and you don't know if they will check back on what you have told them. And so if there are any questions, you can feel free to ask them now, or if you don't want to bring them up right now, you can email us at scrogator@gmail.com. I don't know if anybody else has joined, but in case, I will go back to the beginning if you need to sign in. Does anybody have any questions?
There's something I'd like to add, just as someone who's also gone through the TI interview process. Not everyone here is an EE, and they will probably ask you EE related technical questions. It's good to know them, but I would say don't get too stressed. And if this just helps you in the moment, like calm down and like not get too in your head, like Hunter said, it's less about whether you know the information or exactly how to do the math, and more about how you think about it. So the best thing for you to do if you don't immediately know the answer, or you don't know it at all, is to just think out loud and show them how your brain works, what you do know, how you would apply that logic to this new problem. And that might even be more telling than just regurgitating an answer that you learned in circuits 1.
Sorry, that was a struggle to unmute myself. Thanks, John. All right, does anybody have any other questions?
I have a question. So tomorrow, tomorrow will be like a virtual showcase. So, what's the flow of, how will everything like work?
Yes, that's a good question. We were going to send out an email that kind of explained everything, but I'll take an opportunity to explain it now as well. So essentially the way that the format works is that there will be Zoom calls set up for all of the companies on our website. So the web page that you most likely RSVP'd through. So if you go to here, I can try to pull it up on the screen, maybe. All of the pages that come up are not the page that I want. Okay. If you go to our homepage, it will look like this. If you go to Scrowcase, right now it's not updated because we're not going to update it until right before the event. When you scroll down on this page tomorrow, rather than RSVP now being down here, it will be a list of links to different company calls. There will be essentially opening ceremony that will last for about 30 minutes at the beginning. That call will be the only call that appears at first. And then as soon as that's done, the recruiters will move to their respective calls for their company. And then from there, we will make those links public to those Zoom calls through this page. And that's how you will join the calls. So all of the recruiters will be in their own breakout room. So one recruiter per breakout room. And so when you guys join, you'll enter a waiting room. And as people come in and out of those calls, we'll bring you in from the waiting room. And so once when you are going to be the next person up, we'll bring you out of the waiting room into the main call. And essentially whoever is moderating the call will be in there. We'll give you a heads up that you're going to be the next person going in. We'll usually have one or two people in that main call. And then as soon as the person who is talking to the recruiter leaves the breakout room, we'll just give you a heads up that you're heading in and then send you into the breakout room.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And yeah, I mean, so when we'll go into the breakout room, so I mean, I have never been to career fair before in US. So we just, I mean, we do elevator pitch, we talk to them. I mean, how does it proceed?
So essentially how it will work is that we are trying to make sure that we have, so the reason why we ask for your resume when you submitted the RSVP is essentially so that we put it all into a Google Drive folder, which we then share with the recruiters so they can access your resume through that Google Drive. And then they'll access your resume through that. And then they'll essentially ask you for your name and major. They'll find your, because we have all of your resumes sorted by your major. And so they'll go into the folder for your major, they'll find you, and then they can look at your resume and you just try to, you know, give your elevator pitch. If they have any questions about the resume, your resume, they'll ask you. And so some companies do these sorts of meetings differently. I know in the past TI, I think it was mainly just one guy that did this. TI would act as more of like a critique of your resume and the experience that you have, rather than like taking the opportunity to actually get to know you as a possible candidate, which was questionable in my opinion. Sometimes they'll look at your resume, they'll look at your experience and say, we have X job doing this certain thing that would be of interest to you, you should apply for it. And then other times it will just be, here's my resume. They take it, look at it, you give your elevator pitch, and then from there they're kind of just like, okay, we'll call you if we're interested. So generally speaking, what you want to do is you just want to give your elevator pitch as soon as they have access to your resume, and then they'll lead the conversation from there. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
Is anyone here interested in being a moderator? That means you do have to be the one moving people in between calls in the main section, but you get a more personal, and you get the first meeting with any recruiters you want before the event starts.
Yes, thank you. That is, we are looking for that one person. If anybody is interested, you can either speak up now or email us afterwards. We will be sending out a message in the group me as well. So if you want to respond to it that way, you can. It really just depends. So please let us know if you are interested, because otherwise one of us will double up.
For that moderator, I mean, the event starts at 5 o'clock. So if a person is a moderator, he or she has to be there like before 1 hour or half an hour to arrange.
Yes. So if you choose to be a moderator, rather than from 5 to 8, you'll be there from 4 to 8. the reason for that is because, like we've been saying, since you are going to be moderating these calls, you won't necessarily have the ability to actually participate in the normal times of the event. So we essentially ask the recruiters to join a specific call about an hour before the event starts, to give the opportunity for the moderators to talk to them, because they won't have time to do it during the actual event itself. Any other questions? Anything about interviews or elevator pitches? Any personal experience, any more anecdotes, any more details?
I have a question.
Yes.
So what do you think is like the best way to like get to know a company that you might not have heard of before, besides like the about me on their website or whatever, or about us?
I mean, so what you can do is that if you have a contact at that website, or at that company, sorry, you can always email them and ask them like more of what they're doing. Obviously, if we had any info sessions before this, you could reference that, or email whoever attended that info session. Other than that, I would say you can always use any news articles written about the company. For example, AMD is acquiring a company known as Xilinx, who was supposed to have an info session with us last week. They're acquiring them, and so Xilinx will be liquidated, and all of their assets will become part of AMD. So any ongoing business dealings that are going on are helpful to know. What they produce would be helpful. Like if you wanted to look at their catalog or anything like that, that would also help. Obviously, none of the companies that are going to be here tomorrow are tooling companies, really. We are looking into having tooling companies attend either info sessions in the future, or any scroll cases in the future, so that rather than just being focused on the actual wafer side of things, if people are interested on managing the equipment and being a technician in that respect, that could essentially be a possibility. So you just want to know specifically what they're working on and what they're specialized towards. I don't necessarily think you need to get too technical with what they do necessarily. But like you want to know, especially if like you're applying for a certain position in particular, you want to know whether or not they work in things like analog, what different applications are their devices used in. So like if they're used in the automotive industry or consumer electronics, or industry applications, you want to know what they pander more to. Like TI was specialized in most of their portfolio. Their catalog was geared towards the automotive industry. Other than that, I think industrial settings were their second biggest output. Their third most was consumer electronics, and then other was like a small fraction of that. So most likely they'll have that information on their website somewhere if they're a larger company. But I would say just their website and any like current news articles would be helpful information to reference to get more information on a company.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, if that's it, you guys can head out. If you have any questions that you didn't want to ask over Zoom, you can feel free to email us at scrogator.com or scrogator@gmail.com, or if you want to email me or anybody else on the e-board directly, you can find our LinkedIn's on the website as well on the homepage. So either way, you can find between our GroupMe, our website, our email, and our LinkedIn's, you can find some way to contact us. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all. If that's it though, thank you guys for coming. Hopefully this was helpful, and you guys are free to go.
Just last question. So, there are, you mentioned the 5 companies. So do you recommend to apply in like positions you are interested in before tomorrow?
Yes. Companies really like it when you already have things that you have applied to when you go up to talk to them, because you can specifically say, I'm interested in this position, I've already applied for it. You can show that you are really interested in that company and that you've already put the thought into what positions you want. Because also you don't want to be caught in a situation where you say that like, I want to be a process engineer, but they might not, or a process engineering intern or something along those lines. And then they have none of those positions open, because most likely they will not be, if they're not currently looking for a certain position, most likely, especially for an internship, they're not necessarily going to be flexible with that. Sometimes if you look really good and you perform really well in your interviews and things like that, sometimes they'll make an exception and they will make an opening somewhere for you. But for an internship, usually they're pretty inflexible and they tend to have like a set number of interns that they accept. There was one other thought that I had while going through that, which is another point to make, which is Renesas is only looking for US citizens because they have certain export criterias. So if you are on a visa, and if you are not specifically a US citizen, you cannot apply to Renesas, or they are not currently allowed to accept you as an intern or full-time employee. I just wanted to make sure I said that before Screwcase rolls around tomorrow. So if you are not a US citizen, probably don't want to waste time with Renesas, unless if you are looking to become a US citizen and you would like to possibly work for them in the future. But yes, to close on your question, they really like it when you apply first, because it shows that you're interested. If they really like you and they think that you would be a good fit for that position that you've already applied to, they can go in and make sure that they pull the right person out to say, like, move this person onto an interview. Because sometimes you don't necessarily know on like whoever is running through their resumes that day, you never know what their mood is or what they're feeling like. If all that they have to go off you is a resume, then it might not be the best opportunity. So if you have your resume in their system and then you come to Screwcase and they like you for the person that you are as well as your resume, you have a better chance to get moved on to an interview if one of their own recruiters goes to the person who is going through all of their resumes and being like, this person is good, we want to interview them. You just have better chances that way. You're muted at the moment.
Yeah.